Along the windswept coastline of eastern Scotland, somewhere in the 15th century, shepherds are said to have passed the time knocking smooth stones into rabbit holes using nothing but bent sticks. It sounds like an unremarkable way to kill a slow afternoon, but that simple, idle habit played out on rough coastal grasslands shaped by wind and grazing sheep, but would eventually evolve into a sport so popular that kings tried to ban it. So precise that it would demand its own written rulebook centuries before almost any other game, and so enduring that it would one day be played on nearly every continent on Earth. This is the story of golf, and how a game born from boredom became one of the most disciplined, prestigious sports in the world. This story matters because golf is unlike almost any other major sport. It carries centuries of tradition, etiquette, and quiet ceremony that most modern games have long since abandoned. And understanding where that tradition actually came from reveals just how deeply this sport is tied to a very specific time and place. One small stretch of coastline that shaped how billions of people around the world would eventually spend their weekends. The story begins in Scotland, though the exact origins are tangled up with several earlier, similar games played across Europe. Historians have found references to stick and ball games in the Netherlands called Colvin, and in France called Jeu de Mail, both involving hitting a ball toward a target using a club. And some historians believe Scottish sailors and merchants may have encountered these games through trade before adapting the concept into something distinctly their own. But the version that would eventually become modern golf took shape specifically along the linksland of Scotland's eastern coast. The sandy, undulating terrain between the sea and the farmland, ground considered useless for growing crops but perfect, almost accidentally, for rolling a ball across long, rugged distances. The earliest confirmed written reference to golf in Scotland comes from 1457, in an act passed by the Scottish Parliament under King James II. Far from celebrating the game, this document actually banned golf entirely, along with football, because both sports were distracting young men from practicing archery, a skill the kingdom desperately needed for national defense against England. That single sentence tells us something remarkable. Golf was already popular enough by 1457 that the government felt threatened by it, meaning the game itself must have existed for years, possibly decades, before that official record was ever written down. The ban was reinforced again in 1470 and once more in 1491, suggesting that Scottish golfers simply kept ignoring the law and playing anyway. A small but telling sign of just how deeply the game had already embedded itself into Scottish life. The turning point that finally gave golf official legitimacy came in 1502, when King James IV, ironically the son of a king who had banned the sport, lifted the restriction after signing the Treaty of Perpetual Peace with England, removing the military justification for the ban entirely. Records even show that James IV personally purchased golf clubs from a bowmaker in Perth that same year, making him one of the earliest documented golfers in recorded history. From this point forward, golf's popularity in Scotland only continued to grow, eventually reaching royalty in a much more famous way through Mary, Queen of Scots, who was reportedly playing golf just days after her husband's murder in 1567. A scandal that became part of the case used against her during the political turmoil that eventually led to her execution. Golf continued developing informally throughout Scotland for the next 2 centuries, but the sport still lacked something crucial: a standardized set of rules that could apply beyond a single local course. That changed in 1744, when a group of Scottish golfers known as the Gentlemen Golfers of Leith, later renamed the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers, wrote down the first formal rules of golf ever recorded, a document consisting of just 13 simple rules, established specifically for a competition played on the Leith Links near Edinburgh. This moment marked the beginning of golf as an organized, codified sport rather than a loosely structured pastime. Just 10 years later, in 1754, a group of golfers in the town of St. Andrews formed the Society of St. Andrews Golfers, later renamed the Royal and Ancient Golf Club, and adopted a nearly identical set of rules. Over time, St. Andrews would rise to become the most significant and symbolically important location in the entire sport, eventually earning the title the Home of Golf, a reputation the town still proudly holds today. The old course at St. Andrews is widely believed to have been played on for golf since at least the 1400s, and remarkably, its layout still influences how the modern sport is played, since it was on this course that the standard of 18 holes per round was firmly established. Prior to this, different courses had wildly different numbers of holes, some with as few as 5, others with over 20. But in 1764, the golfers at St. Andrews decided to combine several short holes into fewer, longer ones, reducing their course to 18 holes total. Because St. Andrews carried such enormous influence throughout the golfing world, other clubs began copying this exact format, and 18 holes eventually became the universal standard, still followed on every golf course across the planet. Today, the sport remained largely confined to Scotland and parts of England throughout the following century. But a massive turning point arrived with a Scottish invention that completely transformed the game itself. In 1848, the gutty ball was introduced, a golf ball made from the dried sap of the gutta percha tree, replacing the earlier feathery ball, which was expensive, fragile, and painstakingly handmade by stuffing a leather pouch with boiled feathers. The gutty ball was cheaper, more durable, and could be mass-produced, dramatically lowering the cost of playing golf and opening the sport to a much wider range of people beyond the wealthy elite who had previously dominated the game. Golf's next great expansion came through emigration, as Scottish golfers carried the sport with them to other parts of the world throughout the 1800s. The sport reached the United States in a documented, organized way in 1888, when a Scottish immigrant named John Reed founded the St. Andrews Golf Club in Yonkers, New York, considered the first permanent golf club in America. From there, the sport spread rapidly across the country, leading to the formation of the United States Golf Association in 1894, which began standardizing rules and organizing championships specifically for American players. That same organization held the first US Open in 1895, a tournament that would eventually grow into one of golf's most prestigious annual events. Meanwhile, back in Britain, the sport had already established its own major championship even earlier, with the first Open Championship held in 1860 at Prestwick Golf Club in Scotland, considered the oldest golf tournament in the world and still played annually today. Golf continued growing in prestige and popularity throughout the early 20th century, producing legendary players like Bobby Jones, an American amateur golfer who dominated the sport throughout the 1920s, winning multiple US Opens and British Opens before retiring from competitive golf at just 28 years old, and later founding the Augusta National Golf Club in 1932, home to what would eventually become the Masters Tournament. First played in 1934, the sport faced real challenges throughout the 20th century, particularly around accessibility, since golf remained largely associated with wealthy private clubs for much of its early history in both Britain and America. This began shifting significantly in the post-war decades, as public golf courses became more common and television broadcasts brought the sport into homes across the country, introducing golf to audiences who had never set foot on a private course. This television exposure helped create some of the sport's biggest stars, including Arnold Palmer in the 1950s and 1960s, whose charismatic personality helped popularize golf among everyday Americans, and Jack Nicklaus, whose 18 major championship victories remain one of the most celebrated records in the sport's history. Golf's popularity reached new heights in the 1990s and 2000s with the arrival of Tiger Woods, whose dominance on the course and enormous crossover appeal introduced an entirely new generation of fans to the sport, expanding its audience across cultural and demographic lines in ways golf had never previously achieved. His influence pushed golf further into mainstream popular culture, increasing participation rates and inspiring massive investment in golf course development around the world. From Asia to the Middle East, today golf stands as a truly global sport, played on courses across nearly every continent. From the ancient linksland of Scotland where it all began, to modern resort courses in Dubai, to public courses in cities across America and Asia, it remains one of the few major sports still governed largely by rules and traditions established centuries ago, carrying forward customs of etiquette, honesty, and self-regulation that most modern sports have long since abandoned in favor of referees and strict enforcement. Professional tours like the PGA Tour and the European Tour now offer enormous prize money, while the sport continues expanding its global reach through international events and rising participation across previously untapped markets. That is why this story still matters. Golf's journey from Scottish shepherds knocking stones into rabbit holes to a multi-billion-dollar global sport reveals something powerful about how traditions take root and endure. Few sports can trace such a direct, unbroken line from their earliest recorded origins to their modern form. And that continuity is exactly what makes golf feel less like an invented game and more like a living piece of history. still being played today on the very same coastline where it all began over 5 centuries ago. If this story gave you a new appreciation for the game's deep roots, hit like, subscribe for more true stories behind the sports we love, and tell us in the comments what topic you want us to uncover next.